So, what about the parable of the sheep and the goats? That's often a question that some people bring up when entering into this dialogue or question of apokatastasis, right? You perhaps even have asked this question: what do we do with the parable of the sheep and the goats? So, let's talk through it. This is an ancient fresco of Jesus being the good shepherd, and look what he has on his shoulders. It's not a sheep, but it's a goat. So, what's going on here? Let's talk about it. Let's read the passage for what it is. This is from Matthew chapter 25. Here we go. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" And the king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." This is a famous passage, but here's where it changes. Then he will say to those on his left, the goats, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, you did not look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Then they will go away into eternal punishment, Colossian, but the righteous to eternal life. So this passage is often brought up because it has that phrase, eternal punishment. And in full disclosure, a couple of months ago, I was at a Bible study where we talked about this passage. And I was just attending, but people present said that this parable, which was the topic for the evening, brought them enormous anxiety. Because the sheep and the goats, neither one seems better than one another. They're both unaware of when they were doing the right thing. And so it's almost like it's a gamble of the dice. Like, had the goats known, they would have done something, right? And so it was a fascinating Bible study because it was bringing up questions about the true goodness of God, because here eternal punishment is being threatened for people that otherwise it was a free gamble. But let's talk about it, because the phrase Colossian is something very important to get right. Here we go. The Latin Vulgate, I know it's a fun picture of a goat, right? Just for your entertainment. The Latin Vulgate was a primary text of the early church. It was a translation of the original Greek into Latin by a man named Jerome, and then it took over the European countryside at that time. And so there was a shift when people moved away from Greek and into Latin, probably in some sense because Roman culture overtook Greek culture more and more as the years went on. So Latin became more and more well known in the West. The Latin Vulgate, though, translated that phrase Colossian Ionion this way: Supplicum aeternum. I'm probably pronouncing that a little wrong, but that's the wording. Supplicum is the Latin word for a corporal punishment ordained by law, the punishment of death. Aeternum is the Latin word for eternity. And so Jerome was trying to find the best equivalency for Colossian Ionion that he could, and this is the best that he did. But it dragged with it particular problems. Why? Because the Greek New Testament carried a different sense to these words, a different definition. You could even say Jerome, while doing the best that he could not find the right words. Why? Because Colossian Ionion, Colossian is the Greek word for the process of pruning or correction or curtail. Correction. Ionion is the Greek word for age, era, eon. You can kind of hear the word eon, Ionion. This word actually shows up a number of times in the New Testament. But that goes to say an era of pruning, curtailing, correction is drastically different from eternal punishment. If God's plan is for people to go through an age, era, eon of pruning, how might that make you want to clean up your life in the here and now rather than later, right? How does the age, era, eon of pruning sit with you as you contemplate the people that have actively or passively hurt you? So let's think about this. Think about a time when someone hurt you. What does it do for you to know that God will hold those people accountable by means of an age, era, eon of correction and pruning off the maliciousness or the hurt that they've caused? This parable, I think, has actually caused a lot of misunderstandings, especially in the English-speaking West, which conceptually drew more of its influences from the Latin rather than the Greek. Because at that Bible study a couple of months ago, it would have been fascinating to actually speak up and say, this word for punishment actually in Greek carries with it correction, curtailing, pruning, like a bush or a flower, something that's not growing right. What does it do to say that this parable might actually not be about God dismissing the goats or the unrighteous or the ones lacking compassion, but instead sends them away so that they can be curtailed, corrected, pruned, so that they can come back and enter the fold again? Going back to that picture of Jesus being the good shepherd with even a goat on his shoulders. This parable, properly understood in its original language, not in the Latin, says even God won't give up on the goats. But if you were to read an English translation that draws from the Latin, you might be left thinking that God dismisses and excludes and estranges the goats. So this was What About the Parable of the Sheep and the Goats?